effort to prevent ongoing war crimes from being committed by Israel in the Gaza Strip, Senator Bernie Sanders attempted to place human rights conditions on US military aid to Israel. Unfortunately, it didn't go so well. So I'm gonna give you what the outcome of the Senate vote was in just a moment, but first, let's get familiar with what the resolution entailed. Now, according to The Intercept, the legislation, which was introduced in the upper chamber in December, would have made sure that the State Department submits a report to Congress about allegations of Israel committing human rights violations and whether and how the United States specifically played a role and responded to such acts. So this is really about ensuring that what we are engaging in does not prop up or support human acts or violations of human rights. So if the bill had passed, the State Department would basically be punished if they failed to submit a report within 30 days, meaning that US aid to Israel would be frozen if the State Department fails to provide this reporting to members of Congress. Now, if the State Department had submitted a report to Congress, US aid to Israel would have come to a vote, giving Congress an option to condition, restrict, or terminate security assistance to Israel or do nothing at all. It really depends on what the report from the State Department would entail. And such votes would have required only a simple majority for passage. So this is really about ensuring that Congress does its job as part of our system of checks and balances, that it provides a check on the executive branch, in this case, the State Department, and its unwavering, undying devotion to Israel, regardless of what that government consists of. At the moment, it is a far right government. It just ensures that there's enough oversight. Again, we're supposed to live in a country that has a government structured with these checks and balances. And as you all know, following the September 11th attacks on our country, Congress really did let go of a lot of their power and help to consolidate more power in the executive branch, allowing for the president to act, or the executive branch to act, without congressional approval. And so Bernie Sanders wanted to do something about that, especially in this context where we see Israel carry out war crimes with the very military weaponry and funding that we have provided for them. Now, Sanders had a firm legislative foundation to basically build on this proposal. And so Sanders's resolution was based on the Foreign Assistance Act, which prohibits the American government from providing security assistance to any government which engages in a consistent pattern of gross violations of internationally recognized human rights. Section 502(b)(c) of the law empowers Congress to request information on a country's human rights practices, which Sanders took advantage of to force this vote. So unfortunately, he did force the vote, but the resolution failed to pass. When it came to a vote Tuesday evening, the Senate voted 72-11 to table the resolution, effectively killing it. So I want to talk a little bit about who was in favor of this resolution, because while some of these individuals have been criticized pretty vociferously by me, they deserve credit for the way they voted. That includes LaFonza Butler, the current senator from California. She was appointed by Gavin Newsom. I have some issues with her past and some of the work that she did against labor, but in this case, she did the right thing, and I give her a lot of credit. You also have Martin Heinrich of New Mexico. You have Senator Hirono from Hawaii. You have Ed Markey and Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, Jeff Merkley of Oregon, Chris Van Hollen of Maryland, Peter Welch of Vermont. These are all incredibly courageous members of Congress, of the Senate, who were willing to vote in favor of a resolution that ensured more accountability, not just for our State Department, but for the countries that we are providing military aid to. Now, Rand Paul was the only Republican to vote against tabling the resolution, and he deserves some credit in that regard as well. Van Hollen told The Intercept that it's important for the Senate to get the information required by the proposed report. That's important for transparency, and I think taxpayers have a right to know how their funds are being used. And I completely agree with him on that. At the end of the day, do I think that Congress overall is gonna vote against providing the military aid to Israel? Probably not, but we do deserve to understand, the American people deserve to understand exactly how that aid is being utilized by the countries, in this case Israel, that we're providing that aid to. But let's get to the Democrats who actually voted against this resolution and their excuses for doing so. Because in quote after quote, you'll notice that they'll say things like, yeah, we do have some issues with how Israel is carrying out this war, but we're gonna give you a really weak sauce excuse for why we voted against this resolution. So Senator Chris Murphy is one example. He has a record of scrutinizing human rights abuses by US allies, but he voted against the resolution saying he supports Israel's right to defend itself and that he has deep reservations about the way it has conducted its campaign, but he doesn't support measures potentially designed to cut off funding for Israel. The resolution, he said, is a vehicle toward completely cutting off aid to Israel. I don't think that's the right move for Congress at this time. Now, it doesn't have to be. If Israel was, a little more careful in their military operations, if they decided, maybe we don't level Gaza. Maybe we don't bomb every hospital. Maybe we don't bomb refugee camps. Maybe we're a little more careful with the civilian lives that we've been incredibly reckless and careless with so far. They wouldn't have to worry about the US pulling support to Israel. But it's interesting to me because in my opinion, Senator Murphy's statement there seems to accept the fact that Israel is carrying out war crimes. They plan to continue carrying out war crimes. Thus, this resolution cannot pass because if it passes, there's some likelihood that the United States will pull the military funding from Israel. Now, it's worth getting into how Israel so far has utilized the military aid and the funding that we have provided them in this war on Gaza, because we've shared stories about the 2,000-pound bombs, and what you're watching footage of right now is the destruction carried out in Gaza with those 2,000-pound bombs that we have provided to the IDF. On December 30th, the Wall Street Journal reported that almost 70% of Gaza's homes have been severely damaged or completely destroyed. And just to give you a sense of how many homes we're talking about here, we're talking about more than 307,000 homes in total. There's nothing for Gazans to go home to. We keep hearing about displaced Palestinians, they were forced to evacuate to the south. Now the south is being bombed, and there's all this talk about whether or not Palestinians are going to be allowed to return to their homes in the north. There are no homes in the north. You just saw the footage, you see the reporting, including reporting coming out of publications that have been incredibly favorable and complimentary to Israel in the past. But you can't ignore the images and the reports that we're seeing. You can't ignore the fact that at this point, 10,000 literal children have perished in this war. And we should also talk about the fact that the bombing has damaged Byzantine churches and ancient mosques, factories and apartment buildings, shopping malls and luxury hotels, theaters and schools. Much of the water, electrical, communications, and healthcare infrastructure that made Gaza function is beyond repair. So when we have a discussion about war crimes, this is what we're talking about. The leveling of Gaza, the destruction of their hospitals to a point where none of the hospitals at this point are functioning at 100% capacity. About 3 of them are barely functioning. And you combine that with the aerial bombardments and just the sheer number of Palestinians who haven't perished yet, but are suffering from severe wounds, from amputations, who do not have access to appropriate medicine to stay alive. All of this stuff plays a role in why the international community, with the exception of the United States and the UK, has deep concerns and deep problems with how Israel is carrying out this war. So there's more. The latest military operation carried out by the IDF was at and around the Al Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis. This is in southern Gaza. Displaced Palestinians sheltering at the hospital, which is the largest in the southern region of the Gaza Strip. You see patients now fleeing. There are videos all over the internet showing them being displaced once again. About 7,000 people are believed to have been sheltering on the hospital grounds, according to the United Nations Humanitarian Office. That's what they said in their daily update on Wednesday, adding that an intensification of hostilities in the area was further obstructing access for patients and health workers. And many displaced Palestinians in Gaza have already been relocated several times. They've been displaced. More than 1 million individuals we're talking about here in a already densely populated region of the world. They're being, basically forced into an even smaller portion of the Gaza Strip seeking safety. But as several humanitarian aid organizations, as the UN has said, as the World Health Organization has said, there really is no safe place in the Gaza Strip. Even the areas that have been deemed safe by the IDF have been bombed, have suffered these aerial bombardments and shelling by the IDF. And the World Health Organization reported that Nasser treated 700 patients on Monday of this week, double its usual daily caseload, requiring some patients to be cared for on the floor. It noted Wednesday that only 15 out of Gaza's 36 hospitals were even partially functional. But guys, I mean, you look at footage from within those hospitals, and to say that they're partially functional, it's a structure that is still standing. To say that it's functional as you see all of these people suffering on the floor, children being amputated without any anesthesia, it's laughable to even say that they're partially functional. The Jordanian army also said that the Jordanian field hospital, which is near Nasser, had been severely damaged by Israeli fire in the area. It said a person working at the hospital had been wounded and would be airlifted to Jordan for treatment. So this is obviously increasing hostilities in the region. We're now hearing about Iran conducting airstrikes in 3 different countries, including Pakistan, a nuclear power, including in Syria and Iraq. They did an airstrike in Iraq just yesterday. So this is not only leading to a humanitarian crisis on the ground in Gaza, but it's also leading to an expanded regional war, which is absolutely terrifying, especially when you consider that Pakistan is unfortunately a nuclear power. But it's one thing to hear about the death, destruction, and sheer torture the Palestinians are facing in the Gaza Strip. It's another thing to actually see it. And there are some brave reporters who continue to work there, providing footage, providing reports of what's happening on the ground, despite the fact that dozens of journalists have died in this war. More journalists have died in Gaza than in any other war over the last century, giving you a sense of just how brutal conditions are on the ground. And if you're having difficulty visualizing it, well, here's a report from Channel 4 News in the UK.
Doctors fight to keep alive the victims of an Israeli airstrike in Rafah. A medic tries to comfort one young boy. The body of a small child wrapped in a shroud. A distraught father struggles to process his loss. This, a snapshot of the pain being inflicted every night, every day. More than 10,000 children in Gaza have been killed in this war so far. How many more will die before it ends?
And that is what some Americans and 12 senators are arguing right now as we speak. How far is this gonna go? And are the American people and the American government comfortable with sending military aid, including those 2,000-pound bombs, to a government that has been so incredibly reckless and careless with the lives of these Palestinian civilians? I can only speak for myself and people that I personally know who do not enjoy knowing that, It feels like we have blood on our hands as we sanction this war, as we allow this to continue to be carried out. And it's unfortunate when you look at the Democratic voter base and you notice that upward of 80% of Democrats want a ceasefire, yet the United States Senate, which at the moment is dominated by Democratic politicians, refuses to hear their own constituents out, refuses to carry out the wishes of their own constituents. And I really do hope that there's a political price to pay for that. And finally, the World Food Program estimates that 93% of the Palestinian population in Gaza faces crisis levels of hunger. Disease is also spreading rapidly. The World Health Organization predicts that the death toll from sickness and starvation in coming months could eclipse the number of people who have already been killed so far in Gaza. And that's more than 24,000 people. Now back to the resolution that unfortunately failed in the Senate. Some argue that the 11 senators voting in favor of that resolution shows that there are some signs of progress in the country. One of the people arguing that is Andrew O'Neill from the advocacy group Indivisible. He argues it's frankly historic that this vote, this is such a low bar, took place at all. The number of senators willing to take a vote like this even weeks ago, on the face of it, would have been zero. I appreciate that he's trying to look at the silver lining here, but I argue that this is an indictment of the United States government, specifically the United States Senate, since this is a story about a common sense resolution, if you ask me, failing in the Senate. And I just ask everyone watching, are you comfortable knowing that it is precisely our bombs that we are supplying to the Israeli military that has led to so much suffering and so much death among the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip? I'm not okay with it. And I really do wish that our politicians heard us out and carried out what we want instead of what various lobbying groups like AIPAC and the Democratic Majority for Israel want.
If you enjoyed this video, that's because of our members. They make us independent, they make us strong, and they make us honest. Become a member today by hitting the join button below.